Welcome to this edition of Joffrey Maverick Memories Podcast, a companion project for the documentary film Joffrey, Mavericks of American Dance. This series will highlight personal stories from the alumni of the Joffrey Ballet Company during its more than 50-year history to give a unique inside perspective on what it was like to be part of this groundbreaking American dance company. Today's guest is Christian Holder, a star dancer of the Joffrey Company from 1966 to 1979. He was one of the original dancers in Gerald Arpino's Trinity work, and his work as Death in the Green Table and the Moor in the Moor's Pavane for the 1973 Joffrey Revival are considered high points in the company's history.
You had quite a long and illustrious career with the Joffrey, and you were the source, it seems, of many ballets, especially from Jerry.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yes.
For the most part.
In the film, we talk about you talk about how you were chosen. I think maybe it was Gary who said where you two came from. After the Harkness breakup, I guess he was looking for replacements, to start the company again. And I think you were going to the high school for the performing arts or something?
I danced with my father's company, which was a Caribbean company. So, I'd been on stage all my life. And in fact, my debut was for the Coronation in 1953, representing what were then the colonies on a barge sailing up the Thames from Greenwich in front of Her Majesty. And so that was the beginning. I've just always been on stage. And then there was also acting, and I did repertory theatre here in London. And then I worked with Orson Welles on a project of Moby Dick that was done for the BBC but never actually aired. But I got to work with the master. I would have been 5 or 6. And so this was just the air that I breathed. Everything was the camera, the proscenium, the ballet bar, whatever. Skip a couple of years, I'm about 12, 13, and my father, Bosco Holder, he saw, I was just having a good time, but he saw that there was really no future for me here in ballet, because at that time, this is 1962, 1963, the Royal Ballet was all white, Festival Ballet was all white, Ballet Rambert was a classical company, but was all white, and there was just no room for someone of color. That's just the way it was. And so he thought, Arthur Mitchell is with New York City Ballet, so let's get Chris off to the States. And I had hoped it would be under the wing of Jerome Robbins. It ended up not being with Jerry, but it ended up being with Martha Graham. And Martha and her company came to London in 1963, and her English sponsor, Robin Howard, who was a wonderful man, he provided the wherewithal to give scholarships for British dancers to go to New York, study the Graham technique, and come back to London to be charter members of London Contemporary Dance Theatre, as it was to be known. And I was the youngest of that first batch. My dad got a heads up from Christine Lawson, who was an African-American dancer who was in London at the time. And because it basically, the information just went to the various schools, and, I wasn't part of that loop. So she gave my father a heads up. He found out about the audition. I went, and I received a scholarship. And my parents thought, well, could I finish my school year before going to the States? And the Graham administration said absolutely. So I got the scholarship in 1963, but I didn't go to New York until 1964. And since I was still of high school age, my parents enrolled me in the High School of Performing Arts. My ballet mistress at Performing Arts, Bella Malinka, was a friend of Robert Joffrey. And I was put in the ballet group, since that's basically still what I wanted to do. And since I was getting a lot of modern contemporary dance at the Graham studio after school, so I was in the ballet group. And Miss Malinka was impressed with me, and she apparently spoke to Mr. Joffrey, who had been on the faculty of performing arts, and said, well, Bob, there's a young kid here. I know you're starting a new company. You might want to come in and take a look. So I remember he came in and watched class. I didn't know who he was at the time. And then during the spring of 66, at the dance the dance concert. Recital sounds less than it actually was. It was a dance concert. Joffrey apparently came, and I was featured in several pieces. And then right after that, I was told that Mr. Joffrey wanted to see me down at the school on 6th Avenue, and I went in for the meeting, and he offered me an apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I think you'd be very valuable for the company, and you have a wonderful flair, etc. I remember he said, well, you have to work on your port de bras a little, and get your feet sorted out and that. But I think you'd be very happy here, and this is what we want to do. And will you accept a scholarship? And so I said, well, sounds wonderful, but I have this scholarship with Graham. So he said, well, speak to your parents and sort it out and get back to me, because this is what we are offering you. So I spoke to my parents, and of course this was ballet, which I really wanted to do, and I just had a gut instinct. And so my parents then called up the Graham people, and they were fabulous. They said, well, we understand, and if Christian ever needs a place, wants to study again with us, or if he changes his mind, there'll always be a position here waiting for him. He can continue the scholarship. They were really, really gracious and fabulous.
It was a bit of a risk. I mean, you were leaving Martha Graham, which is a very famous name, very big reputation company, to go with, Joffrey had a name, but it wasn't, he was in ballet, but he wasn't the big company in ballet, and he's just starting over again.
But it was ballet, and I had been referred to him, by Miss Malinka, and the classes were wonderful. We were studying with Hector Zaraspy and Perry Brunson, and then we had Lillian Moore, who was old school, but she helped form us, gave us a point of view. And then Mr. Zaraspy's classes were, phenomenal, really, really lovely. And it was an open class at 12, I think it was, and then alternating with company classes. And on any given day, we might see, Rudolph and Margot might be in town, and they would study with him. Richard Cragen and Marcia Haydée would be in town. They would study with him. You'd see Violette there, Violette Verdi. All these. It was hot. Tiny little studio on 6th Avenue, but boy, and we had fabulous pianists. Philip Leland and oh my God. Just really, really. It was wonderful. And then all of the apprentices, we all got on really, really well. Haynes Owens, Richard Brown, George Montalbano was around. I think he was already in the company. Dermot was already in the company. Susie Magno was in the company. Erica Goodman was an apprentice with me. It was fantastic, and there was energy, and there was a great sense of enthusiasm, even though the very first day of the apprenticeship, I remember Perry was teaching class, and then we were going to watch or join in a rehearsal. I think it was of Gamelon. It was one of because he was always threatening to bring back Gamelon, and somehow it never quite happened. And there was this company meeting on the 5th floor, and the apprentices came up, and the dancers were already in there, and they weren't happy. And so Joffrey came up from his office, and he went straight into the studio. The door was shut because they were furious because they didn't see him as much as they had hoped. He was never in the studio, and he wasn't teaching. And the older dancers in the company, they weren't having it, so they read him the riot act. So there was all this it wasn't negative, electricity in the air. And we sort of got the gist of what was going on. And then at the end, he opened the door and he sort of grinned. He went, welcome. He disappeared down the stairs.
You also talk about Joffrey as a teacher in the film, about how wonderful. He didn't always teach, or he didn't teach that often, but when he did, it was magnificent. What do you think is different about how he taught or how he inspired as opposed to all the other teachers that you had?
Well, I think we were so hungry for him, and his reputation preceded him, because I know Eric Brun had been in his class. All these wonderful people had been in his class. Larry Rhodes. Larry was one of the most beautiful dancers to this day I have ever seen. He was breathtakingly beautiful. Helgi, all these people. There was Nels Jorgensen, who was still dancing at that time. Wonderful, wonderful dancers. And Joffrey had touched all of them. He'd left an artistic fingerprint on all of them. And I don't know, he was our leader. His classes were, considering that the rep was so contemporary and often sort of pop-oriented, it was a very legitimate Orthodox class in the sense that he told us, which port de bras was Vaganova, or, this arabesque Vaganova, or this arabesque Cicchetti. And he expected us to know. He was a wonderful pedagogue in that way. We were expected to remember certain combinations and why certain combinations worked. And then it was his personality in the studio and his enthusiasm and the loud snapping of his fingers, which were, you couldn't miss that. There really was this wonderful atmosphere that year, 67, it really was a sort of can-do atmosphere everywhere, and the rock and roll and the everything combined. And then what San Francisco Ballet were doing, because they were also doing sort of pop art ballets at that time, and it was great. And initially, when Joffrey started on Astarte, we didn't know about. Well, we'd heard it had been. We didn't know about Trin. We didn't know about Max yet. All it was that Joffrey was starting a new ballet. That was the buzz. Mm-hmm. And then a little later, on the call board were the names of about maybe 6 or 8 of us. It was Haynes, Richard Brown, Bob Talmadge, me, I think Arlene. I forget who the other ladies were. It might have been Donna Silva, I don't know. But the discotheque section that we ended up filming at the Dome in East Village, that was going to be on stage, and that was going to be a dance on stage. And Joffrey gave us a couple of variations, thematic sort of things to do that were going to be what ended up being part of the multimedia film projection. Mm-hmm. And that, I think we had about three sessions of that, and then it was scrapped. We weren't called again. But then by that time we knew about Trinette. We knew about, that it was Trinette and Max, because it had originally, I think it was going to be Trinette and Dermot originally, but then Dermot got an injury, and so then it became Trinette and Max. And then, then the momentum started going, and there was sort of the buzz continued that it was going to be something really radical. And then we were called, those of us who had been called to the first rehearsals were then called to the discotheque in St. Mark's Place in New York to actually show up on a given night dressed in our hippie finery and just have a good time, while Gar was tracking us with his camera through the crowds, just dancing. And then Trinette was there with her tattoo and the lovely sort of silver mylar miniskirt. And I don't remember if Max was actually part of that. He might have been filmed separately, but because he was the observer, obviously. So I didn't think he was part of that evening, that first set of filming. But so when I finally did Astarte, it was interesting because sitting in the audience as the man, I was actually seeing fleeting images of myself on the film already that had been filmed in 1967.
Right.
So it was fascinating. It was great.
And so tell me about Trinity. I know that that was one of the pieces that was sort of set for you and Gary and Dermot specifically, an Arpino piece.
Yes.
And Dermot talks about it being like running the minute mile, that it was very, taxing to dance, that piece. And
yes.
How did it feel for you? And in the film, you talk about it being the three of your personalities. It was modeled on.
Yes, it certainly was, because it was originally started for Gary. It was because Gary was much more militant, and you had the Kent State student slayings, and there were political issues. The Gary was very sincere, and he felt very strongly about. And I wasn't called at all. So it was going to be a ballet for, basically it was going to be Gary's ballet. And then someone said, and then Dermot, I think, was brought in. And then someone said, oh, Christian, you should use, Jerry, you should, Christian would be there. Then it could be three guys, because then you have Dermot's the more romantic, one with the pas de deux, and Gary's the militant one. And then, Christian's wearing his African robes, and because I used to go around with robes and bells on my toes and things like that, because I was sort of, no, I wasn't really a hippie, but I was into I had more spiritual pursuits, in those days, and I was studying transcendental meditation. I'd been initiated with the Maharishi, and so there was all that. So I was definitely sort of incense and flowers, and Gary was more militant, and then that's how that sort of grew, and. Because, of course, it wasn't called Trinity initially, so we were just working on this new ballet, and that's sort of how it came out. And some of the phrases, a lot of the phrases, I remember Lily Cockrell, who ended up not being in it, but she did a lot of the initial work doing movement phrases. Dana Shapiro did some movement phrases. Then, Becky was called in, because it was very much choreography by committee, a lot of it, and then it was tweaked and put into some sort of shape. There were sections that certainly I did, with the three boys. There was the improvisation, which was free. Well, actually, it didn't start as being free. It started with just a little step-keeping time to the music, and then bit by bit we took liberties, and then it ended up being sort of free for all. Who can be the wildest,
right?
And that used to bring the house down. It was really lovely. But then when we did it for Dance in America, Joffrey got cold feet because he said, "Oh no, all your arms should be together. Oh no, you should all be on the same foot. Oh no, you should be," and he wanted it more uniform. So I've always felt that the performance in Dance in America was rather more tame than we had usually done it, And I think it would have been fabulous if we'd just been allowed to do what we do.
And do you want to comment at all on Mr. Joffrey's death and when you found out? Did you know he was sick, and did you know when he died?
The first inkling I had was I was in a meeting on the 8th floor at City Center. It was a production meeting because Philip Jerry had asked me to design some costumes for for a ballet he was doing. And they were troublesome costumes, actually, because the palette I was using was too strong. They were reds and pinks and things like that. It was just too strong. But the actual renderings, the designs, we were having a conversation, and usually Mr. Joffrey would have been there, and he wasn't there. And then he came in halfway through, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Joffrey," and I stood up, and he said, "Hello, Christian," and he looked at the designs, and normally he would have sat down and said, "Oh, no, this, more this, less that, no, that's not going to work, have you tried this, go see that, look at these designs here, look at, etc." And he was just very bland and apathetic, and he looked somewhat ashen. And I thought, "Oh, that's strange, that's not like Mr. Joffrey." And I caught Penny's eye, but everything was very non-committal, and went on with it, and then I didn't see him. And then through the grapevine, we heard that he hadn't been well, and then he was in hospital, etc., etc. And we weren't allowed to go to see him in hospital. I think, well, basically that's his prerogative. If he's not at his best and he doesn't want people to see him, I understand that. So I wasn't able to see him in hospital, but I was able to. I called him before he was in hospital for the last time. I called him at home. He was still at home. And I was able to thank him, and I said that I'm not touring or anything now. I'm going to be in New York, and if there's anything that I can do, if you need something ever, please do give me a ring. I'd be only too happy, to be of service. And he said, "Oh, thank you, Christian. That means a lot, etc." And that was the last time I heard his voice. Okay. And then when he actually passed away, I was in, I think, Aurora, Illinois, with Margot. We were working on a piece with Hubbard Street. And we got the news. And then certainly all of our generation, we communicated with each other, etc. And then came the time for the viewing, which was at Frank E. Campbell, which was really quite touching. Jerry was there, and all the stage crew from City Center were there, and it was a very sort of profound, loving evening. It was really, really lovely. And then we had the funeral, and at that time, Edith Daddario was at the school, etc., and you always asked Mrs. Daddario, if, when, etc. And I remember going to her and saying, "Mrs. Daddario, I understand, there's going to be then the funeral. After the viewing, there's going to be the funeral at Frankie Campbell, and what time's it start?" And her very blunt reply was, "Well, Christian, it's really for the current company members only." And I thought, hang on, did she really just say that? And she, "Oh yes, well, it's only for the, we don't know if there's going to be room." And I thought, oh, for God's sake, because most of the company members at that point, I would say about a third of them, had never even worked with Joffrey because he'd been ill,
Right. Yeah.
So it was like Margot and me and Becky. We just said, "Oh, no, we're not having this." So we just arrived, and it was a beautiful service. And his coffin was adorned, laden with white lilac, and it was just lovely. It was a really, really, really lovely service, and Bea spoke very poignantly. And I remember she spoke about being she made a reference to Sacre de Printemps, where she was the victim,
right.
in the circle, and etc. And for me, her speech was really, really beautiful. And then after that, several of us went over to Aladar's apartment, who was Mr. Joffrey's partner at that time, and Aladar wasn't well either, but we all congregated there, and he had a garden apartment, and it was really lovely. And we sort of took a deep breath, and then finally we all went on our separate ways. And then the other full circle was, or at least the first full circle for me actually, was then doing Cinderella, being asked by Adam Skloot years and years and years later, would Gary and I care to be well, they call them ugly stepsisters. We didn't think we were ugly at all. We thought we were rather distinguished. But to be the stepsisters in Cinderella. And because we had mentioned, Gary had gone to set, he was going to set Petrushka on ABT, and ABT were going to be using the set that the Joffrey in Chicago were then using, which was different from our set when we were at City Center, because that set had, I think, it had just sort of dwindled away and was rotting, etc. So they needed a new set. So I, just for moral support, had accompanied Gary to go to Chicago to have a look at their Petrushka. And during the intermission before Petrushka, Adam said, well, let's all go out, have a drink afterwards. I think it was Chathel, maybe Cami, Mark, Goldweber, Adam. We all went over to a hotel and we had a drink. And so, so it's like, well, what are you doing? Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So I said, well, and what's next for you? He said, well, we're so excited because we're finally going to get Ashton's Cinderella. So immediately Gary and I looked at each other. And Adam said, what was that about? He said, we said, way back when, because Joffrey had wanted it for so long, and it had been left to Michael Soames, and he didn't think that the company was ready. But since Michael Soames' death, and it was now with Wendy Soames, his widow, she had come that same time to have a look at the company, and she felt that the company was definitely ready. So they got the rights to do it. And I said, well, you have to understand, in the 70s, when Joffrey first wanted to do this, he said to Gary and myself that if he ever gets it, he would want Gary and me to be the stepsisters. So when, sort of hint, so right. So as soon as Adam heard that, we saw the electric light bulb go off over his head, and then he made it happen. And that was our homecoming and our farewell, because Arpino was still alive then.
Right.
So we were able to say goodbye to Arpino, with our performances. We were able to dance with that generation of the company. We were able to be back in the Auditorium Theater in Chicago. And it was one of Mr. Joffrey's wishes. So on so many counts, it was really a sublime, this was 2006, I think it was, but really a really sublime experience, really sublime. And so that really was emotionally, I think, certainly for me, was the farewell.
Thank you for listening to this edition of our podcast. Visit our website at www.joffreymovie.com to sign up and receive a free series of digital photo books entitled Joffrey Maverick Moments. Find us on Facebook, Joffrey Ballet Movie. Follow us on Twitter @JoffreyMovie. And view our video clips on our YouTube channel, Joffrey Movie.